Now my great pleasure to introduce today's commencement speaker. Dr. Richard Olds is the son of the 8th president of Springfield College, Glenn A. Olds. Dr. Olds grew up on this campus and was here in 1964 when Martin Luther King Jr. gave the commencement speech, a truly historic event for this college. Dr. Olds attended Willamette University, where, as an undergraduate, he began cultivating his own passion for social and service justice through involvement in refugee relocation programs in Eastern Europe. This interest led him to attend medical school at Case Western Reserve University, which offered a program focused on international health. He completed his residency training in internal medicine at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, and later trained in infectious disease and tropical medicine. Dr. Olds' career has included serving as the founding director of the Brown University International Health Institute, chairman of medicine at the Metro Health campus of Case Western Reserve University, and chairman of medicine at the Medical College of Wisconsin. In 2010, Dr. Olds was named Vice Chancellor and founding dean of the School of Medicine at the University of California, Riverside, the first new medical school on the West Coast in almost 50 years. Tomorrow, at the undergraduate commencement ceremony, we will award him an honorary doctorate of humanics. I'm pleased to present to you Dr. Richard Olds.
Well, I would like to start by congratulating the parents and grandparents, the wives, the husbands, the partners, the family members of the graduates of 2014. You're the ones that were the role models, often made great sacrifices, and supported these graduates. Please, graduates of 2014, join me again in congratulating those in the audience that made this day possible. Next, I'd like to thank Dr. Cooper for her generous introduction. And on behalf of my wife, Jackie, my sister, Linda, and my children, Glenn, Michael, and Trevor, thank you for the opportunity of addressing you today with historical anecdotes of two individuals, one who was clearly inspirational to me and my family, and the other who inspired an entire nation. Dr. Cooper, members of the faculty, members of the graduating class of this great institution of learning, ladies and gentlemen, I need not pause to say how very delighted I am to be here this afternoon. With the single substitution of Springfield's 13th president, Dr. Cooper, for its 8th president, Dr. Olds, that is exactly how Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. began his commencement address on June 14, 1964, an event which has been described as one of Springfield's finest. Now, it has been almost 50 years since that address, and that may seem like a very long time for the 2014 graduates. And the world of 1960 was a very different place. It was America where there were white-only lunch counters, where there were black and white seats on the bus, there were segregated washrooms, even water coolers. It was a world where civil rights advocates literally lost their lives in the struggle for equality. Tragically, Dr. King himself was to be assassinated 4 years after he gave this commencement address in '64. It is a time I still remember as a young boy of 14 who literally grew up on this campus at the time when my father was president. I would briefly like to recall the backstory leading up to that commencement in 1964, which has been wonderfully detailed by Professor Martin DeBrow of our faculty, and as I remember from my father's personal reflections. Glenn Olds was a great admirer of Dr. King and his cause. Both were Protestant ministers and strong advocates for equal rights at a time when there was great violence on both sides. What separated Dr. King from many civil rights leaders was his commitments to the teaching of Mahatma Gandhi and the principles of nonviolent civil disobedience. Now, in 1964, Dr. King was already a very well-known person, but certainly very controversial. Earlier that year, Dr. King had been named Man of the Year by Time magazine. He had already led the Washington March and given the now famous I Have a Dream speech. Later that year, he would receive the Nobel Peace Prize. Several universities offered Dr. King an honorary degree that year. Springfield College secured Dr. King's acceptance through the efforts of several of my father's personal friends, including then Andrew Young, a trusted lieutenant of Dr. King, later to become a member of Congress and UN ambassador. Now, following the announcement of that honorary degree, however, a series of events occurred behind the scenes that many of you in the audience would find very surprising, since we honor Dr. King's birthday today as a national holiday. In 1964, Dr. King had many enemies. Chief among them were J. Edgar Hoover, director of the FBI. Almost immediately, my father began to get phone calls from the FBI, which became increasingly strident that Springfield College should withdraw its invitation to this, and quote, dangerous radical. Recently released declassified documents now clarify the extent to which the FBI attempted to defame Dr. King, both personally and professionally. Under the very same pressure, Marquette University withdrew its offer of an honorary degree. Finally, my father told the FBI if they were unwilling to publicly present their accusations, he would no longer receive their phone calls, and hung up on the assistant director. The FBI then attempted to alter the events by recruiting a Massachusetts senator who was also a member of Springfield College's Board of Governors. Significant pressure was applied, and ultimately my father had to put his job on the line, and I quote, "Was it or was it not the prerogative of the president to select the commencement speaker?" A final attempt to derail Dr. King's selection came from a wealthy member of the Board of Trustees, who had suggested that he was willing to give Springfield College a $1 million gift. Now, $1 million in 1964 would have been the largest private donation this school would have ever received. In an emotional meeting at his home, that individual shouted at my father, and I quote, "I just heard you giving that goddamn black man an honorary degree," and tore up that check in my father's face. All these behind-the-scenes events were largely unknown outside our family until years later. But even after this address, it almost didn't occur for a very public reason. On Thursday, June 11th, Dr. King was arrested in St. Augustine, Florida, for requesting service at an all-white restaurant. The local judge planned to hold Dr. King without bail until Monday. My father threatened the judge that he would broadcast King's commencement address from the local jail if he didn't release him. And unwilling to attract national attention, Dr. King was released on $900 bond on Saturday, and he spoke at this event the following day. Now, although the world of 1964 may seem like a very long time ago for you and the graduates of 2014, I would ask you to consider the universal lessons of this story. We all faced many difficult situations for which we know what the right thing to do is, but for which there will be significant negative consequences. Sometimes the real situation will not be known by others, and yet the negative outcomes will still be there. Is it not ultimately those types of decisions that define us as people and what we stand for personally? Although the U.S. is no longer a country with segregated schools and restaurants, it would be naive for you and the graduates of 2014 to think you enter a world free of prejudice, hate, and violence. You need only review the headlines of the last few months to know that Dr. King's message is still needed in today's troubled world. Although it has been very appropriate to focus on Dr. King and his message equally for all, I would also like to share with you today a little more about the untold history of Springfield's 8th president, whose courage made the event possible 50 years ago. Glenn A. Olds Jr.'s life was dedicated to service from the time he took up the ministry at the age of 17. Always a believer in nonviolence, he once stood in the road in the middle of a highway leading to a Japanese-American farming community in Oregon. It was the night of the attack of Pearl Harbor, and he and 4 other pastors stood unarmed, arms linked, and turned back to an angry, drunken mob intent on burning that community out. Following his tenure at Springfield College, he became ambassador to the United Nations. And in 1970, he was ordered by the president to vote against international ownership of the seabeds, a position where the United States was the sole opposing vote. In typical fashion for my father, he stood up on the floor of the General Assembly and spoke in favor of the proposal, then walked out and made his deputy vote against it. He was fired by Richard Milhouse Nixon the next day. Now, in 1970, Richard Nixon was a very popular president, and as a direct result of his stand at the UN, my father was unemployed for the next 18 months. The only job in America he could get was to become president of Kent State University 6 months after 4 students were killed by Ohio National Guardsmen. After rebuilding that university over the next decade, he ultimately resigned without another job when the faculty voted to unionize. He then took on what even his family considered a truly impossible task. The Methodist bishop in Alaska asked Glenn to try and reopen a small liberal arts college that was both bankrupt and closed. Alaska Methodist University had been a small college with a strong commitment to community service, very much like Springfield College. You should know that no college in America that was bankrupt and closed had ever successfully reopened. 2 years later, having raised $100 million and literally scrubbed the floors with my mother and my uncle, fixed the buildings, recruited the faculty, and personally taught most of the curriculum, the school was accredited and opened as Alaska Pacific University. It remains today the only private university in Alaska. I think it would be fair to say that my father carried the spirit of Springfield College and its commitment to service to humanity his entire life. Glenn Olds passed away in 2006 at the age of 85. To the class of 2014, I would point out that the future is often filled with many obstacles. The road is not always easy. You will need to find the inner strength to overcome those obstacles and be guided by your own moral compass. The social issues of 2014 are different than those of 1964, but they are no less daunting. Fight for what you believe in with your whole body, mind, and spirit. Let the spirit of Springfield College guide your future as it did my father. I would like to close my remarks with a personal reflection on the impact that the events of 1964 had on me. Although I followed a very different path from my father, his courage and commitment influenced me greatly. In 2010, I was asked to come to inland Southern California and open the first new medical school on the west coast of the United States in almost 50 years. A medical school committed to diversity and to service to the underserved. At the time, it appeared to be a challenge, but certainly a doable one. Our medical school team hired the faculty, we recruited the leadership, we created a new curriculum, and we asked for national accreditation to open in 2012. Just days after our site visit on June 28, 2011, the governor of the state of California decided to cut our state support from the California budget as a cost-saving measure. As a direct result, we were not granted accreditation. Now, I should tell you that there has never been a medical school in the United States that has ever been turned down by that national accrediting body that has ever successfully opened. Suddenly, this project seemed a great deal like the challenges that my father had faced many times in the past. Fortunately, I had a great team and a very supportive chancellor, and we were able to raise $100 million in 9 months. We begged the national accrediting body to give us a second chance, and although we opened 1 year and 5 months late, the School of Medicine at the University of California, Riverside opened August 2013 with its inaugural class of 50 students. Now, on my desk in my office in Riverside, I keep a framed black and white 4x7 photograph of the platform party from the 1964 Springfield College commencement, including both Dr. King and Dr. Glenn A. Olds. Throughout my career, I have had to face many difficult and even a few impossible tasks. I have always garnered encouragement from that photograph and the courageous events that it symbolizes. I would like you, the graduates of 2014, to remember with me the events of 50 years ago, a culmination of events where one man of integrity made it possible for one man with a dream to make history here at your college. As you leave this institution of learning and begin your careers, I hope you will remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and apply them to your own life's work. It is always the right time to do the right thing. Thank you.